October 17, 2023 meeting of the City of Charleston Board of Zoning Appeals zoning. Present here today are Allison Grass, Howell Morrison. Sorry, Ellen. I'll go ahead and start that again. This is the October 17, 2023 meeting of the City of Charleston Board of Zoning Appeals zoning. Present here this evening are Allison Grass, Howell Morrison, Robin Richards, John Bennett, Bill Goodwin Jr.'s, Chappie McKay, and me, your chair, Jeff Tibbles. Present from the planning staff are Lee Batchelder, Penny Ashby, and Emma McQuarrie. These proceedings are being recorded, and we ask that those who speak please identify yourself for the record. We will conduct this meeting in the usual fashion. We will first receive information from city staff about the application and the recommendation. If the recommendation is favorable and no one objects to the application, the matter is uncontested. The Board of Zoning Appeals usually, but not always, approves uncontested applications. For all applications, the board reserves the right to ask questions of the staff, applicant, or others in attendance prior to rendering a decision. If, however, the city recommends against the application, or if there is opposition to the application, we treat the application as contested and hear from the applicant and anyone else who is in favor of the application. Next, we hear from anyone opposed, followed by a short rebuttal from the applicant. We then close the public hearing portion of the meeting for that particular application and open discussion to the Board of Zoning Appeals members only. We will then make a decision to approve with conditions, or deny the application. The Board of Zoning Appeals zoning has the authority to do three things. Number one, hear appeals to decisions of the zoning administrator. Number two, grant special exceptions, a fact-finding function of the board. And number three, grant variances to the zoning ordinance if the application meets the hardship test outlined in section 54-924 of the ordinance. The board may deliberate and make a final decision on a matter by majority vote of members present at the hearing and qualified to vote, provided that not less than a quorum is present and qualified to vote. However, an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the board members present and voting shall be required before a use variance may be granted. For a variance to be granted, the Board of Zoning Appeals must make the following findings. A, that there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. B, these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. C, because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. And D, the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. By our city's ordinance, I'm required to have you swear to under oath to provide truthful testimony if you intend to speak. So if you do intend to speak, please raise your right hand. And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You'll signify by saying I do. Thank you. We have no deferrals this evening. We have a short agenda. On item A of our agenda is the review of minutes and deferred applications from previously advertised BZA-Z agendas. Number one is the review of the minutes of the October 3rd, 2023 board meeting. Those minutes have been included in the materials for the board members. Ms. Richards and I were absent from that meeting, but we still do have a quorum. Mr. Goodwin is going to be here, right? But
yes.
Okay. But I think we've still got enough to pass the minutes. Is there a motion?
Move for approval.
All right, Mr. McKay moves to approve. Second. All right, there were 3 seconds. Mr. Morrison, you came in first. Mr. Morrison seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. The motion passes 4-0. The minutes are approved. Next item on our agenda, A2, 33 Lockwood Boulevard, TMS number 460-14-00-0007 and 026, Zone GB, requesting an appeal of the zoning administrator's decision to allow the use of a temporary construction trailer for a business office. The owner is the Harborage at Ashley Marina. The applicant is John Linton, Walker, Gressett and Linton LLC. Mr. Batchel.
This is application concerning the Ashley Marina. And its location is off Blackwood Boulevard, 33 Blackwood Boulevard, just north of the James Island Connector. And I'll point out one thing right off the bat, that we missed the full breadth of the applicant's request, but they're appealing not only my decision to allow or permit a temporary construction trailer as a business office, but also my approval of the use of a office houseboat type built boat as an office for the marina. So, and that hasn't been installed yet, but it's under construction and planned to be installed within the next month or so. And but it's unusual to have a appeal or any kind of issues come up with marina. There really aren't too many restrictions that we have, other than marinas have to be on commercial zone properties. And they have to meet parking requirements, and the parking requirements are based on the slips. So I'll get into that more detail. But here we have a marina that has the parking and access to the docks for all the slips and other facilities that you would typically find at the marina. But the marina itself is under a horizontal property regime, so it's got multiple owners, and one owner is, I think, upset with how other owners are conducting business in the marina, and so I think that's where this is coming from. But the marina, I think, predates our parking requirements. We realized back when questions came up about this last year that, and I don't remember the exact date that it was constructed, but it's been there for a number of years. And we didn't have any parking requirements back then. So it was permitted, and after that, at some point, we did adopt some parking requirements for marinas based on the slips. So the parking that is there today, the parking spaces that are there today are not quite enough to meet the requirements for a marina based on the size of this marina, with the number of slips it has. But that's how that occurred. And so back in August of last year, August of 2022, we approved and the city issued a permit for a construction trailer to be placed on the in the parking lot, an office trailer to be placed there. It was our understanding at the time there was some construction going on at the marina, and they needed this trailer. And I'm not sure if that was necessarily true. The records aren't clear about that. So when questions were raised, we said, well, we'll just let the permit run its course. The permits run for 6 months. And this was never intended to be a permanent structure. And then we'll ask that the trailer be removed. Well, subsequent to that, there were other issues that came up, and they eventually did get a permit to do more repair work on the marina. And so we did issue another permit in July of this year, for the trailer to remain there through the end of the year. So there is currently a permit in place to allow the trailer to be there through the end of the year. This is the application form that they filed on at the end of June for the temporary mobile construction office trailer. And this is the DHEC permit that they were issued on June 1st to make repairs to replace, says right over here, it says replacing four pilings damaged by an oversized vessel dock during a storm on May 1st of this year. And so they did have a permit, and typically we're pretty lenient with our approvals for these temporary uses. Because we understand that sometimes construction can require these kinds of facilities to go along with the work that's being done. And whether it's a brand new building or repairs or whatever. So, and I think there's even construction trailers on the city marina property that have been there for a while because they're doing expansion and repair work on their marina right now as well. So not unusual. And this is the actual permit that was issued with the condition that it would be removed by the end of the year. So that's and here's the photograph of the office trailer and its location in the parking lot. And it does have this sign on it that indicates that the it's the regime HOA office as well. And from the street, it's this trailer right here. So that gives you an idea of where its location is within that parking lot. It's right by the water, right by the access to the docks. So that's that. And so and like I said, this is a temporary situation. We always try and be somewhat lenient with approving these, and they typically go in parking lots if there's a parking lot available to place it. So nothing unusual about that. The other part of this appeal has to do with the HOA's desire to have a permanent office in a houseboat that will become an office for their HOA, and that would be in a slip within the marina. And so first off, we don't really involve ourselves in what goes on within the marinas on the slips. So charter boats, other types of activities that occur within marinas on the boats, we don't really regulate. We don't, and I know that some people live on boats. We don't treat those as residential dwelling units that require parking specifically for the occupancy of that boat. That some boats have even been used as short-term rental type units, and some, but we never have gotten into regulating that type of activity. Charter boats, same thing. Those could be short-term rentals in effect because people could live on them while they're chartering the boat and taking it out and using it. And so, number one, we don't really attempt to restrict somebody from using a boat for an office. The other thing about that is that and this is the zoning map, the city zoning map, but you can see that the slips themselves are not within any zoning district within the city. The marina is regulated because that dock does have contact and connect to the land. And that's the connection, I think, for the marina use itself, and where we get the requirement for the parking based on the number of slips. But beyond that, we don't really have any specific regulations that address what goes on within the slips. And here's a fuel dock. That's not an unusual feature for a marina. So even if we were gonna regulate this, I think what they're going to do with this office, floating office, in effect, is more or less an accessory use to the marina use, just like the fuel dock would be. And even a ship store, if that was on a floating dock or a fixed dock within the marina. So I don't feel like we should get involved in the regulation of that type of activity. So I guess those are my positions, and here's the parking requirement straight out of our zoning ordinance for marinas. That's all we say is, depending on the type of slip, there's a requirement that goes with those marinas. And so that's really, I think, all I can say about how those decisions were made. It would not be any different for any other marina in the city. So I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have them, but I know that the appellant is here representing one of the owners, and then also I think that there's a representative from the HOA also here who can address the board on their reasons for having these facilities.
Thank you, Lee. So it's my understanding the city would recommend denial of this appeal. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right, so we'll hear from the appellant first, Mr. Linton.
Good evening, John Linton on behalf of HMA Ashley Marina LLC. HMA was the original developer of the Ashley Marina. It still owns multiple slips, including what's referred to as the C dock, which is the little short-term rental area. And then also owns the commercial building that's on the site. And there's two aspects of the appeal, as you heard. One is the use of this temporary construction trailer, which has now been on the site for almost a year and a half, since August 2022, as an HOA management office. And I understand the need to be flexible with construction and delays and that sort of thing. But what you heard was this permit, the reason it's there is for a repair of 4 pilings from storm in May. And what you saw was a big blown up picture that says this is an HOA regime office building. And one thing I want to stress to the board is that there is no prior office space that the owner in this case had. This is a new office use that started with this construction trailer. It would not be like if you were redoing your house and you moved into the construction trailer out on the front curb. It would be like if you did that and you put another one next to it and had a rental unit and another one next to it. It is a completely new use. We do not appeal or not objecting to a temporary construction trailer being on the property for use by a construction company to do legitimate repairs. Everybody understands that that happens, that needs to happen. But as a excuse to start a new use on property, it is not appropriate. And that's what's been done here by the HOA. The second part of the appeal is the attempt to make this new use that's never been at 33 Lockwood by this property owner, the HOA, permanent. And the way they're doing that is with a floating office, which you heard some good descriptors by Mr. Batchelder of what this is. At one point it was a houseboat, but you also heard there would be construction of it and installation of it within the next month or two. This is not necessarily just some transient thing that can be moved. This is a office use. They are intending on running an office out of it, so it's more than a little boat. And I'd like to address the city's position that they don't need to regulate what kind of uses are on the property. The parking regulations that are in place do regulate parking for slips at marinas. They were up on the board, and it's one parking space for every 2 wet slips. There are 233 wet slips on this property. And there are somewhere between 66 and 72 parking spots. So they should have around 116, and they've got 66 or 72 for the existing marina. There's also a 3,800 square foot office building on the property that my client owns that also relies on all that parking. It is dramatically a existing non-conforming use under the parking regulations. And this is a completely new office use that will be in one of these slips. And to me, it's hard to say that the city isn't going to regulate parking for what's in a slip and then say, but we do. This is much more dramatic than a houseboat that somebody's living on, because that is the use of a boat in a way that a boat's used. This is the installation of something they're calling a floating building. So that is the primary objection, or I should say not primary, the first. The second part of the appeal on the new office use over the water is that there are restrictive covenants in the form of the master deed that govern this property, and the city has a responsibility not to approve property uses that violate such property restrictions. And section 9.21, or sorry, 9.1 and 9.2A of the master deed, which is one of the attachments to the appeal, and it's only about the 4th page in, which is an amendment. You will see that these boat slips, the regular slips, so there's a little section where the fuel dock is, there's a little section where the T dock is. Those are not, that's not what I'm talking about. This planned office is planned for one of the regular boat slips of the marina. The master deed says, with respect to those, vessels moored within the boat slips shall be for personal use and the enjoyment of the locker unit owners to which they are assigned. Later it says, and no commercial activity can be conducted from the boat slips. Well, the HOA is proposing to use that new office to manage the property management's commercial use. And they're also currently operating a third-party leasing business where they're essentially a broker for other slip owners that want to rent out their slip to a third party. That's just a straight for-profit business that they're going to run out of this new office space. And that directly violates the master deed. It's directly a reason that the parking is important. It's a new use. And what we would ask for is that the city zoning administrator's decisions on these 2 points be reversed, and that the construction trailer be prohibited from being used for a commercial use, and that any office use on the property be required to go through the normal planning channels, because the parking is an issue and the master deed's an issue. But now we have an office building who has not been looked at by the fire code. It needs to go through the entire planning process, because in our estimation, there's no basis for allowing this type of intensive new use at this property. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Linton. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak in favor of this appeal? Is there anybody else who wants to join Mr. Linton in his arguments? Okay, so nobody else, so we'll hear from anybody who is opposed to this appeal. Anybody? Oh. Come on up and please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rick Sayed, 33 Lockwood Drive. Is is where the marina is located, and I'm one of the owners, actually own 2 slips. Just want to thank the board for allowing us the time to represent, our concerns for the Ashley Marina. With me, by the way, also is our dock master and a member of the board. I know that if we're in town hall and it's after 5 o'clock, I know that you guys are either appointed or elected, but you're community volunteers, so I know your time is valuable. I served on zoning for 8 years in my previous town, so I appreciate your time here tonight. The Ashley Marina is a community of over 230 property owners. We're essentially an HOA with a volunteer board. We're a unique over-the-water community that's made up of a diverse group of people, wide ranges in age, incomes, professions. We have many veterans and retirees who can't afford to live anywhere else. The VA across the street is an essential for a lot of these folks. The one thing that we all have in common is that we all care about the marina. It's a source of where if we love boating in the water, if we love sailing, or for many folks, it's just a place to live. And you see that in our annual meetings. And the owners have been for many years yearning for change and improvement. And we're really in the midst of a major turnaround at the marina. And when I first came to Charleston, I was looking for a slip for my boat. And I actually purchased a slip at the marina prior to moving here without actually setting foot in the marina. When I arrived here and I inspected everything, I was quite frankly pretty disturbed by what I saw. The marina was run down, and it was clear that there wasn't much management or maintenance going on. And in time, I learned more about the history of the marina and how the board came into being, the formation of the HOA, and the struggles that they've been through many years. And I thought, I could help this place. And against my wife's wishes, I joined another board. And that's when I really found out just how problematic things were. Structurally and aesthetically, the marina had fallen into disrepair. Fundamentally, they structured the HOA and its reliance on its AMH, is the company. When the marina was purchased by the declarant and converted into a condominium, okay, they created everything that you see. In other words, if there aren't enough parking spaces, they were the one that established that. They talk about it being non-conforming. So was their building that's on property, which has 2 offices on the ground floor and a flood zone, non-conforming. But this happened before, I guess, a lot of rules were in place, so that it's grandfathered in. So for us, the people that have volunteered to be on the board, we could see all these problems, and these problems, and I've interviewed board members all the way back to the beginning, and they will tell you how it's been a problem since day one. But going forward, we've had a new board that's been formed over the last year and a half, and it's a very strong board with very smart legal and business minds, and they're community minded. They volunteer, and we realized that the only way to save the marina was to unshackle from AMH. What he didn't tell you is that AMH positioned themselves as the management company after they sold everyone that's left. And their goal here is not to suddenly be civically minded and worried about the trailer. It's because they're not happy about the fact that we severed the contract. So it's not about the permit for the trailer. It's just a small mobile construction office that takes up essentially a parking space. And for that matter, when a couple years ago, the board paid to repave and restripe the parking lot, we actually created four more spaces than the declarant original had. So even with the use temporarily of the trailer in that one space, we're still more spaces than were originally formed. So what it represents to AMH is our independence from them. They don't want us to be able to self-manage. They lost revenue and they're upset about it. They don't really care about the technicalities of the temporary trailer permitting. They're just angry. They're no longer receiving the revenue. It's apparent and has them so upset that their strategy is to destabilize the community. So that we will have difficulties in managing. The first permit was for, we had an unnamed storm in April of the previous year that destroyed 150 feet of dock at the end of T-Dock. And I remember being out there at midnight. We were, with the volunteers, we were out there lashing one section of dock to another so it wouldn't completely break off. It was being held on only by the electrical wires. That was the first major repair. A marina, if nothing else, is in a constant state of repair. The elements, the nature of the construction requires, we could file for permits with DHEC every other month for something else that has to be repaired. Currently, the repair that we're looking at right now is a large tour boat came in, pressed up against the dock. It was a wind load that was unexpected, I guess. The boat couldn't get off the dock and it wound up pushing over four of the pilots. And so right now we're in the middle of having special engineering testing done with sound waves to determine the extent of the damage. We have received estimates from two major dock construction repair companies. Okay. And so we're just trying to do our best to maintain the marina. We understand that the trailer is temporary. As a person who's been involved with HOAs and with zoning and town boards, I understand the compliance, and it's not easy to get these permits. I mean, getting a permit for a temporary construction trailer is like getting a permit for a building. And we had to bring drawings and we had to do special tie downs, and all along the way, Will Scott, who's one of the biggest suppliers of construction trailers all around the country, said, you won't need a permit down there, but I knew better. And I knew that we had to follow the rules. And we went through all of that, through every bit of the process to make sure that we followed every rule to get this trailer. So there's so much irony here, because when this tour boat damaged the dock and we had to have a meeting to discuss the usability of the dock, what we would do in the meantime, where we would reposition boats, what the repair would be. Guess who came and attended the meeting in this very same trailer? Representatives from AMH, right? So here they were attending a meeting relevant to the repair, yet they want to say that, trailers shouldn't be there. So we are looking at a long-term solution. We looked at what other marinas are doing, and probably one of the most prominent marinas in all of Charleston is City Marina, right next to us. And what they have done is they found a great solution. Is they would purchase a floating vessel, a boat, by all legal description, vessels that have an HIN, that's a hull ID number. They can be constructed as houseboats or in any configuration you want. And we have purchased one, and it is a completely movable vessel with shore hookup and water hookup. It can be relocated anywhere. It is, for all intent and purpose, a boat that we will float into the marina, position into one of the slips, and we will use that as our base of operations so that we can continue to do the constant repairs and maintenance that are needed. As an HOA, we have to operate as an HOA and service the community. we used to have space in the building. But of course, the moment we severed the contract, we were evicted by AMH, and there were a lot of other requests that they made. Basically, again, all to make life difficult. The irony is they own space, and everything that we do to improve the marina actually benefits AMH because they own CDOT. They actually are the company that manages the fuel. They too, provide services. They have a floating office in a marina. So, I hope the irony is not lost on this board. But again, rather than constantly applying for permits or repairs, that there will be a never-ending need for repairs in a marina, we will opt for a off-the-land solution that is governed by rules that are not land-based land use. They're water-based. So we're going to have a registered vessel. We will register it with the state. We will pay the tax as you would with any vessel that you keep, and it will be completely able to move at any time. So that's basically it. I hope you kind of understand and see what's going on here today. Again, it's not about a permit for the trailer. It's just a small construction office that's away from the road. It just represents an independence from AMH, and they can't stand it. So that's why they're here today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else to speak in favor of, in opposition to the appeal, which would be, I suppose, in favor of the association and not in favor of AMH. Yes, sir. Come on up, please.
John Mazzoli, 15-year, 16-year resident of Charleston and a relatively recent slip owner at the marina and a member of the board. And Rick, gave you a lot of detail on what's going on here. Helen did use the word dramatic multiple times to talk about how dramatic our actions were. There's a lot of drama here, but it's not related to this small construction office or the need for a floating trailer or a floating office. There's a floating office 200 yards away. Nothing dramatic, nothing. Parking is a problem, right? That's one of the main things we have to manage as an association. That problem was created by the appellant. He built the marina with the numbers 4 less spaces than it has today. He is the primary user of spaces, and his primary complaint with the board is that we will not give him 24 or more unrestricted spaces that are dedicated for his building that he can take away. He has generally offered to reduce the drama by selling us the building at a price above what we think makes economic sense. A lot of reasons, and he can't find anybody else that's been on the market a long time. Can't find anybody else who thinks it makes economic sense. But if he can tighten the screws on us sufficiently, he thinks we'll have to buy his building from him. And that's really what this appeal is about. He's not worried about them not getting the full benefit of the 4 spaces we've created and only getting the benefit of 3. He's not worried about the floating office taking up one of the spaces that the association bought. He says we're running a for-profit leasing business. Everybody on the board is a volunteer. We do have paid employees, they're dock hands and people who are doing actual work, turning screws and trying to repair decades of deferred maintenance into that marina. The profit that he's worried about with the for-profit leasing business is he has a competing lease business. That is a for-profit business where the profits go into the appellant's pocket. So that's the thing he's worried about us running out of the marina. He ran it out of the building he would like to sells to us. But it's now a dramatic change that we're going to give that money to the association and potentially run it out of the floating office. So really want to just press home the point that this is not really troubled by how this piece of Charleston is being used or what harm it may be causing to anyone other than the appellant. It's about trying to squeeze us into buying that building from him at a higher price than he can sell it to anybody.
Mr. Mazzoli, just one question, because it touched on one of the things that you mentioned. The appellant is contending that the use of the floating office would be a commercial use. Is the association a for-profit or a nonprofit entity?
It's not the problem.
Okay. And if it made money off of, you say leasing, and what is the leasing business you're describing?
I currently own a slip right now, but I keep my boat in the dry dock. The appellant manages my slip and charges me 30% of the rent they collect each month. That goes into his pocket. If I were to switch that over to the business that is being run by the association, they would either keep less of my money or what they kept would be used for the betterment of the marina. We'd have better lighting, we'd have better security, we'd have better power. We're currently defending a lawsuit because an electrician sustained serious injury while trying to repair the electrical system. The appellant allowed to fall into disrepair for 2 decades. He built the marina, he wrote all these little rules for his independent development and independent benefit. I don't know if anybody's ever owned a condo. I've owned a couple. Every time I buy one, I'm always surprised. Oh, I should have read that document a little tighter. I didn't see how, well, he set every obstacle for anybody to move him out. He did a job nobody was happy with for decades. When we finally moved him out, now he's concerned about all the parking and all these other things. The only way to solve it is for us to buy that building from him.
So any revenue from the leasing of the spaces, is that reinvested in the maintenance and upkeep of the marina?
Yes, we are currently, and we had a membership, we had the entire membership vote, so 233 members had to round them all up. And Rick, who managed the process, could tell me the exact percentage, but it was a real bear that the board had to call all the members. We couldn't get the books and records from the appellant because he didn't turn them over. He now alleges he gave them to somebody in boxes in the parking lot. So we had to hunt these people down through tax revenue to get the votes to try and get it done. The appellant has a disproportionate share of votes. He voted against it, but we got approved a $15 million project to basically rebuild the marina. It's falling in the water. You guys walked out there, the finger docks are, at an angle. The pilings are not designed for the wind loads they should have been designed for. It's in a serious state of disrepair. There's a huge project underway. It's been approved. We pulled the budget together. At every step, the appellant has tried to get in our way. And this is another one of those steps. If he can just get our little trailer kicked out of there, then we're going to have to come back to him and let him run the marina or buy his building from him. Those are the only 2 choices that appear to be acceptable.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mazzoli. Anybody else in favor, opposed to the appeal and in favor of the association? Anybody else would like to speak? You have an opportunity for rebuttal, Mr.
Just very briefly, what you heard from the 2 people from the association was a lot about what their preconceived notions of my client's motives are. What you didn't hear from them was that they are following the rules or that they're willing to. What you heard from them is my client's not a good guy, so they shouldn't have to follow the rules. And I want to just take a minute and try to put a different view out there of what's going on, which is my client developed this marina when there were no parking requirements, obviously. And as I mentioned, nobody tried to hide this. I said, he owns that building. He owns the office building right there. He owns a whole bunch of slips. He owns a dock. And the association, a few years ago, fired his management company, has been trying to squeeze him out of the marina by not following the rules. They want to have their own office space. They want to expand the office in the marina. They want to have more people go into their floating office, more employees, so that, guess what? My client's office building doesn't have parking. There is more than one way to look at motives. That's The reason I didn't want to get up here and talk to you all about motives in the beginning, I talked about the dramatic change in the use. That they are going to have an office on site and that the office would have to comply with parking and with the master deed that prohibits commercial activities. It doesn't prohibit commercial activities that at the end of the day generate profit for an individual. It prohibits commercial activities, which includes running a leasing business where you charge people a fee to lease things for them. Just because it's done by an HOA, it's not a core function of an HOA, it's a venture to generate profit for the HOA. But I didn't want to get up here and talk to you about their motives and why they're trying to skirt the rules and why they won't follow the planning process and why they want to squeeze my client's parking as much as possible. That they want to try to buy this building maybe for below value. And if they can devalue it enough by getting around all the rules that the city has set up, then maybe they can have their cake and eat it too. But they decided to go there. And I want to bring it back and I want to ask each of you to focus on the use and the ordinances, not people's renditions of what a motive might be. This trailer is only approved for construction activities. It's not being used for that. It's being used as an office. That's not allowed. This proposed floating office is going to be constructed and installed. And it would have to follow the parking requirements and comply with the master deed and all of the other the city's zoning rules. You heard Mr. Batchelder say, we regulate the parking of this. We don't really look at what they're doing that much, but we regulate the parking because it's connected right here. And here's all that parking. Here's the building my client owns. Here's the C dock my client owns, and he owns another slip or two. We're asking you to do what the city has done by ordinance, which is regulate the parking in this area. And that means that you can't have a new use in an area that does not comply with the established parking requirements. You can't expand a non-conforming use without a variance. If they wanted to follow the rules, they would have filed an application for a variance and come to this board and said, you know, it's really too bad the developer didn't build enough parking spaces because there wasn't a rule about that back then, but we're in a jam and we need to pass the variance test to get a variance to have an office with 0 parking. And if this court, or if this board reverses the zoning administrator's decision, all that will happen is they'll have to go through the planning process and comply with the rules. Thank you.
Mr. Lynn, while you're up there, I have a question, and maybe other board members have questions as well, but we heard something about a floating office that already exists in one of the slips. Is that permitted under the master deed?
It is actually, I believe what they're talking about is the dock house, which is right here, and it's actually a specific, as I recall, it is a specific area that's called out in the master deed, and it's been there, as far as I know, from the beginning. Nobody's added any new office space.
So it would be outside of the, telling us it would be outside of the definition of boat slip as that term is defined in the excerpt that you submitted.
Exactly, and I spared you some of it because it gets a little long, but it does specifically call out that it's basically differentiates at different times. This is the T dock. This is the commercial unit on the T dock. This is the C dock and the fuel dock, and everything else are called locker units and slips.
Okay.
And so, and I think the new office is somewhere around here. So yeah, it's completely different and specifically.
It's got its own defined use under the master deed.
It does.
Got it. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Linton while he's available? Like we'll wait and see. Thank you.
So in your presentation, I heard and maybe wrong, that the whole issue of parking is grandfathered in the appellant's presentation. He contends that parking minimums are applicable because this is a new construction that is contingent to high land, if I understand it. And I probably don't. But what is the city's reading of parking requirements?
Well, that we don't get involved in signing requirements to each individual use within a marina that we would consider an accessory use to that marina. So I think we would consider an office, a ship store, a fuel dock, all those things to be accessory uses that are commonly found within a marina. We don't then add to the slip requirement for parking with additional requirements and it may have been even that, I know that the city didn't have any parking requirements, but I don't know that we looked at the requirements for the office building as an office when that was built, because that was, again, part of the marina. And was going to include some additional amenities, bathrooms, I guess, lockers, whatever, for the marina as well as office space. So, it's just not, we don't dive down into the details to that extent.
So the marina is not just grandfathered from the city's perspective on parking issues. The city's policy is not to get involved with parking minimums at marinas. Is that what you're saying?
Beyond the requirement based on the number of slips.
So it is grandfathered because this doesn't meet the requirement.
Exactly.
Of slips by a long shot.
Right.
Okay. And what about the argument the appellant makes that the new proposed floating office should be having to go through full process because it's contingent to CDOC or whatever that argument is? Did you address that when you first made your presentation? I'm just wondering what the city's position is. It sounds like it's going to be a genuine vote as defined by, yes, DNR, or DHEC, or both. Because it's going to have the ID.
Sounds like that, right? I agree.
It also sounds like it's questionable whether it's a commercial venture. If it's not a not-for-profit HOA. Any extra monies to be applied to maintenance, I guess, is what the contention is by the HOA, or the assurance is by the HOA. I don't know, a lot of issues flying around here. Somebody else figure this out.
Lee, is there an active building permit?
Well, the city doesn't issue building permits for marinas per se. We do issue permits for the electrical systems and I guess plumbing, and then and plumbing is also necessary to address fire code requirements. But I don't think we issue permits for the actual construction of the docks. So,
But I think, Mr. McKay, I think I saw displayed earlier a construction permit from DHEC that expires in December of 23. If I'm correct. in my memory.
right,
I did see that DHEC card for those four posts. I just didn't know if there's an active open permit for electrical, plumbing, for any of the trades that would be.
on the dock.
I'm not aware of any.
Do y'all know if y'all got any open permits for MP&E?
No, we don't expect to have to do any electrical or other utility work with regard to this repair.
And are y'all under contract for the replacement repair of those 4 piles?
We have 2 bids right now, and we're waiting for the assessment from the structural testing that was done. And then the board will then from there make a decision. The 2 repair estimates, they vary. One includes replacing 2 pilings or adding 2, and the other one speaks of replacing or adding 3. So depending upon what the engineer's determination to the extent of damages, that will probably influence the board's decision on which one to go with and the amount of money to spend.
And y'all have an anticipated start date and an anticipated construction schedule for the completion of work? I know it's gonna be a little bit different if it's 4 versus 2.
Yeah.
But generally those guys, driving 2 more weeks, not months.
No,
Difference.
it's, well, to give you an idea, they replaced several pilings and twice as much section of dock in 5 days when we had the last repair done. So it can go pretty quick once we go in gear with this. But again, for example, today we just discovered that there's a fractured piling in the marina in a different area, and we might have to apply for another DHEC OCR and, permit for that. And so there may be, and we could wind up in a perpetual state of permitting the trailer, but we don't want to do that. And so again, what we are doing is we are buying a boat that is not governed, with all respect, by this board. It is over the water. It's DHEC OCRM. That's their purview. It's over the water. So this will be a floating vessel that we will use for the necessary repair of the marina, all for the marina. Every bit of what happens is just for the owners. We're an HOA.
What's the timing of the delivery of that vessel?
We expect it in 3 to 4 weeks. The update I was given this morning was 3 weeks from now. I don't want to say 3 weeks, I'll say 3 to 4, just so, I don't overpromise. But it is clear that we will transition before this permit ends. We don't want the trailer in the permit any longer than it needs to be. It's an expense. It's not really an eyesore. We paid extra money to have it skirted. We paid extra money to have it properly tied because it's in a flood zone. We followed all of the rules that should make that happen, but we will remove it as quickly as possible. And certainly, we are very confident that it'll be removed before this permit expires, and we won't have to ask for any more.
And Lee, when does it expire?
The city's permit at the end of the year.
So that's sufficient.
Yes, absolutely.
The question for the city, the appellant mentioned that that there are restrictive covenants on the property and says the city has a responsibility to not approve projects that counter these. What would be your response to that?
Right.
Is there anything we need to pay attention to about the restrictive?
I don't think I was aware of those covenants when we had these conversations earlier this year, but even if I was, I don't know that I'd say this is a commercial use. To me, it doesn't seem like commercial use, but. So. And if in the event of a question about whether something was prohibited or not with regard to the use. And there is a state law that says when we're aware of a private covenant that prohibits a use, that we shouldn't be approving permits for that use. So like a somebody came in and said, we want to build a chicken coop in our backyard. And the HOA let us know that we don't allow chicken coops, we wouldn't permit that use. In this case, the HOA, I guess we would look to the HOA to determine what the proper interpretation would be of their covenants. And that's what we've done with regard to short-term rentals. Some neighborhoods have taken a position that the language of their covenants prohibits them, and we've honored that. Others, like Daniel Island, have said, no, we allow short-term rental units on our island, so HOA.
So you do not consider this commercial use, is essentially what you're saying.
It doesn't sound like it's a commercial use to me.
Thank you.
To the HOA, you guys had a meeting, you voted, and all these have been decided through your group, is that the?
Yeah, in fact, it was an incredible effort. In order to, and we're moving on to a $14 million project to replace the entire marina. In order to get something of that accomplished, we needed a supermajority. And people said, you never get a supermajority in an HOA, so that's an impossibility. Even with their voting against us, we still were able to achieve that supermajority. There is such a longing amongst the owners for positive change that all it took was a simple phone call and the inspiration of hope that we could make the marina better to get that supermajority. If you discount, we need 66.7% of all owners. If you take out their vote, we achieved like an 80%. We still achieved the requirement. We came in at like 75 or 78% overall. So it just speaks to what the community is trying to accomplish. And last year I put in over like 1,000 hours of personal time to help this marina. So if you could bring all those owners in this meeting right now, they would all, to a single person, tell you about the dramatic improvement that we've made by taking our marina back and just working on it ourselves. And in just a short time, we've accomplished more repair and aesthetic improvements in months than they did in years.
Lee, if they wanted to extend the use of that trailer on the site, they would have to come back here in December, January.
Right, they'd have to apply for another permit from the city, and it would come through us as well as building inspections.
But I don't understand, and Mr. Linton, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't understand the appellant is objecting to the issuance of the permit for the construction trailer per se, correct? I think the objection is twofold. Number one, the use of the construction trailer for an activity unrelated to construction. And number two, the proposal of a so-called floating office or something that will be built, installed, constructed, whatever, parked in one of the boat slips.
That's exactly right. I mean, if they're gonna do these repairs by the end of the year and the trailer needs to stay there, there's no objection to that, as long as they take the sign off and stop using it for the completely different purpose of managing the entire marina, unrelated to any, they're not managing the construction out of it. They're managing their property owners association out of it and leasing, running a real estate venture out of it. And that's the objection. And then same thing, you're right, the objection is for this future use. And the portion of the covenants or the master deed that I read from, it to me is very clear that this would be considered a use that violates it, because it says that vessels moored within the boat slips will be for personal use. And then it says, and no commercial activity. So it's not saying you have to be generating a profit on your end of the year balance sheet. It's saying this is for the use of someone that's using a boat for what people use their boats for. And they're gonna use it to manage an association and run a real estate venture. And so it's not based on how much profit you make or how you calculate it. It's based on the use under the master deed.
And Lee, has the association submitted a permit application for that floating office, for lack of better term?
They haven't, and I wouldn't expect them to, because I don't think we would, again, we don't get into the permitting of the boats that go into that slip, into that marina.
Okay, I'm gonna publish the language of the statute. So it's the statute that's cited is section 629-1145 of the South Carolina Code. It's entitled Determining Existence of Restrictive Covenant Effect. A, in an application for a permit, the local planning agency must inquire in the application or by written instructions to an applicant whether the tract or parcel of land is restricted by any recorded covenant that is contrary to and conflicts with or prohibits the permitted activity. B, if a local planning agency has actual notice of a restrictive covenant on a tract or parcel of land that is contrary to, conflicts with, or prohibits the permitted activity, number one, in the application for the permit, or number two, from materials or information submitted by the person or persons requesting the permit, or number three, from any other source, including but not limited to other property holders, the local planning agency must not issue the permit unless the local planning agency receives confirmation from the applicant that the restrictive covenant has been released for the tract or parcel of land by action of the appropriate authority or property holders or by court order. And then it goes on and it says, as used in this section, and it contains definitions, and it says permit does not mean an authorization to build or place a structure on a tract or parcel of land. So, and then it says restrictive covenant does not mean a restriction concerning a type of structure that may be built or placed on a tract or parcel of land. So Mr. Linton, help us with that issue. Number one, the association is not applying for a permit here, which seems to be a triggering prerequisite for the statute's application. And number two, the statutory section specifically says it doesn't apply to authorization to build or place a structure on tract or parcel of land. It's two separate issues.
Well, I'll start with the second one, which is, this is about the use of what they're doing. So the second one really doesn't apply. The first is, you said since they're not applying for a permit, basically we don't have to approve a permit, but that is basically the entire objection here, which is they're operating outside of any planning process. And I appreciate that the city doesn't regulate if somebody lives on their boat as a residence versus as a recreational boat. But the city, to me, has a responsibility that if somebody's proposing a use, just because it happens to be in a boat slip, if it's a new use that's not a traditional marina use, in that the use of a boat slip, they are things that would happen in a marina out of an office somewhere. The office being in a boat slip, they're just getting around the rules. I mean, that's all it is.
What if somebody runs his law office out of his private boat slip? He's a remote worker after COVID. When he spends 4 or 5 hours a day practicing law out of his boat slip, then what of him?
I think the city would probably legitimately not be concerned about that. But taking your hypothetical, what if that person had two paralegals, a secretary and a receptionist in that boat slip, was meeting with clients on the dock, had people parking in the parking lot, and was not remote working? They were running an office out of it. That would be something that I think the city should be concerned with. Now, I understand these aren't easy decisions. We think they are, but I understand there's sympathy for property owners that want to build and do things, but they're, I don't want sympathies to govern when I have a client who has a substantial interest in this marina and has a substantial interest in the rules being followed.
Yes, and I think this board will not make a decision on sympathy. This board will make a decision on following the rules and following the law. And the question really is when that statute applies, when it does not. But I assume that the covenants, conditions, and restrictions master deed that you've referenced, I assume that it has a section or sections on private remedies that are available to the declarant or other owners that they may exercise against violators, and particularly in court or otherwise, there may even be an alternative dispute resolution provision in there.
Well, and that would be the case with almost any situation where a municipality is called upon by the state statute to decide whether a particular use violates covenants. That would always be something that would be there in most situations. That's so common, you were able to recall it very quickly. So I wouldn't suggest, to me, it does not make sense to say that there may be a private dispute resolution process for something that is, in my view, required by the state of this board to enforce.
I saw a couple hands up from the, yeah, please. Ms.
Sorry,
Bettis.
just to keep
Yeah.
with this. Mr. Linton, you mentioned when you made your presentation that you said the deed says parking spaces must be used for slip-owned users and not for commercial uses. And then when you just read what it says, you said it's for personal.
Personal use. And it's for,
personal use.
sorry if I said parking spaces, I was mistaken. It's the actual, the slips
Okay, so
need to be used where they're proposing putting this office, installing it, has to be for personal use of the owner of the slip.
So does it have to be both? That it has to be used by the slip or for slip users and not commercial use? Does it have to meet both of those requirements?
Yes,
Does that
and
make
it's that it has to be used for personal use and no commercial activity. If you read the whole thing, there is also, it has nothing to do with this, but just since you asked, there is an exception about certain charter fishing uses that are allowed, but it has nothing to do with this. I just wanted to make sure to point it out since we're talking in detail about that section.
So
I mean, what's the definition of personal use? And I don't know, I know I'm getting too much in the weeds, but it just doesn't, it's not clear to me.
So- So when the office was in the declarant's building, there was no dispute about people using the office being able to park in the parking lot. Then, I mean, I just wonder if this parking is a real issue or not. It seems to me it's not.
The parking is very underprovided by the ordinance, and that there's,
Well, it was underprovided by the declarant first.
well, I understand, but by the requirements of the ordinance now, if you're at, there should be 117 for the marina and there's 70 or so. And then there should be one for every 500 square feet of office building. Is that correct? Something
Now,
like
again,
that.
I don't know if we ever really considered this building separately from the marina and
Well, it's-
figuring out parking.
Right, and so that's what I mean, it's all non-conforming, but I just, making the point that there are
There's
you
no
know,
more,
more
but
additional.
there's no
parking.
more total demand on the parking in the lot than there was when the office was in the building, as opposed to the office building.
Well, the office building's still in there and there's other offices.
Right, and there
This is
was,
a new use, so there's more people.
why is there new use with more people if the same HOA office was formerly run out of the building?
Because, well, it was not, I don't think it was the management office at the time, but anyway, if you take something out of that office building and put it here. And then you refill that office building with another office tenant. That's more. It replaced the,
If you know. All right.
How many parking spaces will the office need? I mean, how many people are gonna be there?
Mr. Mazzola, go ahead. We'll hear from the association again.
There's a couple of things. So first, the association manages 11 slips. So we did talk about, trying to find if you operated your law office, it would be one thing, but if you brought on a bunch of associates and paralegals, client visits, and you're managing 11 slips. Every activity that's being done there was done inside the marina, in that building, which is also inside the marina. It's not creating. Rick can also talk about, we glossed over an exception for charter businesses. Rick knows the language better than I, so I'm going to defer to him. Rick, you discussed that.
So, yes, so, the intent is, I guess, what we're trying to focus on. So I'll try to clarify for you as we understand. When the HOA was formed, there would have been a concern that in the marina, there could be the possibility of people opening up businesses in their boats, like a law firm and two paralegals and all that. You know, it could be any business, could be a tailor shop. That was clearly not what the intended goals were in the formation. But what does a marina do? Right? So what would we have is normal usage. And so the exception was charters. And at the time, charters were historically more just fishing charters, deep sea charters. So we have to allow that. It's a business, but it's a marina business. It's related to the use of boats. So it's natural or appropriate. We actually, in our meeting, one of the things that we also did was we amended the language because we also had pleasure charters, people that would just take folks out on their boat, to go around the harbor, have a cocktail. So the language is there to prevent the proliferation of businesses occurring on the boat, right? Not to prevent the marina from operating itself as a marina. And what does a marina operation do? Well, AMH knows that you provide slip management, maintain the docks, you fuel boats, you help boats coming in and out if they need help being, tied up. So the intent was to prevent, commercial businesses from propagating on boats, not to prevent the marina from operating itself and being a marina. And so the one exception that had to be drawn as a distinct business were charters, because that is germane as one of the typical uses, normal and customary uses of a marina would be charters, both fishing charters and pleasure charters. They want to contort it into saying, oh, that non-use of commercial that now applies to the acreage. We're the marina itself. We are the marina. We are the community. We are there to provide services to the owners. They don't like that we're also providing a service, right? Because they want to have the monopoly on that service. That's what this is about.
Am I reading it correctly that people, let's see this. All such business invitees shall park off-site. This is in reference to fishing charters. Is that correct?
Yes, right. So we've been very strict with parking. We know that parking is an issue. It's been one of the main things that our owners tell us all the time. If you come into this parking lot, you will see more signage about restricted parking. We have special tags that can't be duplicated. We have stencils on the ground in front of every space that you're required to have a pass. So if there's a fishing charter, if there's any type of charter, any of those folks have to park off-site. Okay? Another point is that AMH, when they managed the marina, had several employees that would show up and work there. And they took parking spaces. Now that not only are they not doing that and don't have those additional employees, but they've also pulled their offices, which were in the building, out of the building. And so the 2 or 3 people that we have that work directly for the HOA, right, are not taking up any more parking spaces than the previous dock hands that were under AMH's employees. So there's no critical change of need or utilization. And as I mentioned earlier, when we used HOA money to repave and raise parking lot, it would flood.